Hi there, Darren at Protopilot here, and today we're going to be looking at the second part of our look at input fields. Today we're going to be looking at something a little bit more advanced, so let me just give you a little look at what we're going to be building. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to do the transition from the logo to the login screen. So the first thing we want to do is we want to make sure that the origin of the graphic is set to the center. This is important so that when the animation happens, it's going to scale from the center of the graphic, and it's not going to kind of animate off onto one side. So we want this to start automatically, so we're going to add a start trigger. And start triggers are triggers that happen when the scene loads. So if you ever want to do anything straight away as soon as the scene loads, then that's the trigger you want to be using. And we're going to add a jump response. And jump is the response that allows you to jump from scene to scene. And we're going to select our login screen, and we're just going to use a fade transition, just a standard built-in fade transition, and we're going to delay that just by 0.8 of a second, just so you see it on screen momentarily before it animates. We don't want to go straight into the animation, that can be a bit jarring. And we need to do two things to this logo. We need to scale it and we need to move it. So let's add scale. And again, we need to select the logo layer. And we're going to scale by the size, and we can keep these default, scale by size and scale to. And we want to keep it square, so we'll just close the padlock. And we're going to scale it to 132. Okay. And then finally, we want to move it into position. And we're going to move it to 128. Which, if we just check the second logo, so we've got that at position 62. Now the reason why the number's different is because we're using the graphical center point, and because the whole graphic is larger, then the center point is going to be further away from the outside, so therefore the value is going to be different. So I've just made sure that I've taken into account the scale factor when I've worked out what that position is going to be. So let's just turn off the jump for a moment. So you can just switch off responses if you don't want to run, just by hitting the little switch on the response, and you'll see that grays out. Just want to make sure this animation works all right. So let's just restart that so we can see that animating. Okay, and let's just turn that jump back on. Let's preview that. Okay. Okay, so we got the logo moving into position, and then we've got the login fading in. Now I want to, that's a little bit jarring, just a little bit too quick. So I just want to mess around with the timings a little bit. So let's look at let's close it off for a second. Let's look at the scale. Let's kind of change the scale. I think we're going to just like slow it down a little bit. So let's put the 0.4 in. And we're going to just delay that by 0.2. And then for the move, we're going to create that duration 0.6, and we're also going to delay it by 0.2. So basically we're going to scale the object first. That's going to take a much shorter duration, and we just want that scale to finish before the move finishes, before it lands in its final spot, just to make that whole animation a little bit smoother. So let's test that out. Okay, so now we've got this kind of whooshing into position. So it's like it's coming from up close and kind of animating further away, just creating a nice animation there. Okay, so that's the first piece of our login done. Okay, for the second piece of this particular tutorial around input fields is we're going to go to the login scene, and we're going to basically make these input fields work. We're going to add the error handling to the password field. So let's get started on that. So the first thing we're going to do is we want basically the keyboard to come up as soon as the user arrives on this screen. So we're going to add another start trigger, and we're going to choose a response called focus, and focus will allow us to pre-select one of the input fields. So we're going to choose username, and we've got two options here, and we're going to leave it at the default, which is focus in, because that's going to basically make the keyboard come up. So that's all we need to do there. We're then going to move on to actually actioning the conditional logic. So this is all going to be around the password, just for the sake of this tutorial. It's going to be all around the password field. So we're going to add another trigger, and we want this to trigger on when the user hits the return key on the keyboard. So we're going to use the return trigger, and we're going to, it's already by default it's set it to password, so we're going to use that field. That's the field we want to use. That's good. And we're going to add our first condition, and we want to basically check what the value of the password field has. So we've got password already checked, so we need to choose a different property of password. We're looking for the text. We want to read the text. So there's a text property which allows us to get the text that the user has typed in, and we want to check if that equals to our password. So you can use any word here. Going to be super unique here, and choose password. Please don't use this for your real password. You'll notice we've got a capital P here as well, so it is case sensitive. So we're going to check if the text value of the password field equals the value password with a capital P. And if it does, so that's the successful criteria, we're going to jump to logged in. Okay, so that's looking good. So let's just preview that. So you can type anything in the username field for the sake of this. So we're going to type in password. If we hit the return key, we successfully go to the logged in state. So that's all looking good. So the second condition is for the fails scenario. So if the password doesn't match, so for this condition, we're going to pretty much just do the reverse. So we're going to select password, so basically the password field, and again we're going to select the text property of that, and we're going to use a different conditional operator. So this time we're going to use this one at the end with the cross through it. So this one means not equal, so it's the exact opposite of equal. So to make it really easy, we can just put in our password again, which is password with a capital P. So we're looking for a value that doesn't equal this. So that's anything else you might type that's not that particular word. So if it doesn't equal, we want to show that in some sort of visual way within the input field. So we're going to do a couple of things. We're going to just use some move responses to jiggle that, basically jiggle the input field left and right. So we're going to use move by. So move by is quite handy when you're for this sort of thing, because we're just going to move it. We want to move it a little bit and we want to move it back to where it was. So you can use move to, but I find move by, you're obviously just telling it how far you want it to move, not where you want it to move. So it's a little bit less mess you have to worry about. And we're just going to move it on the horizontal axis. So we're just going to add 10. And we're going to use, so there's a whole bunch of built-in easing curves, interpolators that you can use. So we want to get a little bit of bounce into the animation. So we're going to use the spring interpolator, and we're going to just mess with the tension and the friction. So these two sliders just control the amount of springiness in your animation. So it's a bit of trial and error. So I'm just going to stick in some predetermined values. And you'll see here that in the duration, which is grayed out, it has the actual time, the amount of time that this animation is going to take. So it's calculated from these two values. So you can't edit this directly. It's just calculated from the tension and the friction. So that's going to move it to the left. Actually, sorry, no, it's going to move it to the right. And we want to then move it back. So we want to, in fact, we can just duplicate that move trigger, and we're just going to move it by -10. And for the second one, we need to delay this because we want this animation to run first. So the first move we want to run, and then we want the second move to run. So we can see the duration is 1.22. So we're just going to overlap that slightly and just start the second animation at 0.1 of a second. If we don't do that, it's going to run both animations at exactly the same time, and you're not going to get the kind of left and right jiggle. So we want to keep a nice jiggle. So let's preview that. So remembering that we can now, you can put anything in this password, but now we're going to type something else. So you can type absolutely anything in here, and it's going to find out that that's not going to match, and we get the little jiggle. So that's good, but we just want to add a little bit more to it. Just want to highlight which field has got the error. So we're just going to add a red border to the password field. So that's really easy. We've got a border response. So we can add a border. Let's just choose a nice standard pillar box red color. And we need to make sure the fill is 100, otherwise you won't see it. And we're going to change the width of the border. Let's try 4 pixels. Okay, and we'll leave the default animation on here. It's just 0.2 duration. You can obviously change that to how you feel you want it to look. Let's just have a quick look at this. In fact, I can just tap over into this one if I just type anything and hit return. And now we've got the red border. Okay, so we've handled the focus so that when the user comes to the screen, it's going to focus the keyboard up. We've handled the 2 conditions. So we've got our first condition, which is the success condition, which we'll be looking for the word password as being a successful the successful password, and it'll allow us through to the logged in state. And we've got our second condition, which is looking for anything but the password. So we're looking for that error condition, and then we're doing our error handling there. One final thing, I'm just going to add a little bit of animation to when we go into the logged in state. So I'm just going to use, again, this a baked in transition. We're going to use slide in, and we're going to keep the default, which is right to left. So let's just preview that. So again, for success, I need to type password with a capital P, hit return, and then we get the slide in. Okay, so that's our second segment done. And the final thing we want to do is we just want to add a personalized message to this screen. So you can see here I've got a welcome message, and I've just got this kind of placeholder text name here. So we want to take the name from the username field, and we're going to pass that from one scene to another into this label. So we'll do that next. Okay, so the final thing we need to do is we need to hook up the username, the value that the user types in as their username, and we want to pass that, like we said, to this label. So the first thing we need to do when we're passing values from scenes to scenes, we need to use variables to hold that value so we can pass that across scenes. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to go to this variables panel, which just sits at the bottom of the screen down here, and we're going to add a variable for all scenes, because we want all the scenes. Obviously we're using scenes, so we need to access it from everywhere. So we're going to use that, and we're going to call this name. And you can see over here there's 3 different kinds of variables that we can have. So by default it defaults to number, so that's not what we want in this case. We want it to be a text variable, so we're just going to change that to text. We're going to leave that blank, and we're going to need to figure out a way of grabbing the value of the username that the user types in. So I'm going to add it in this condition. So we've got this first condition, if you remember, this is our success condition, when the user successfully passes in the password. So if we just hover, you'll see this little plus button pop up, which means that we can add another response in this position. So we're just going to hit plus here, and we're going to use the assign response. So assign response allows us to assign values to variables. So we're going to choose our variable name, and we're going to use a simple formula to grab the input that the user puts into this input field, and we're going to write that into that variable that we just created. So if we just tap on the FX button to go into our formulas, and we're going to hit the plus button, and we're going to find our username field. So we want to target our username field, and again, like everything in ProtoPie, you've got a whole bunch of properties that you can access. For this particular one, we want the text property, so we're just going to choose text. So we're going to grab username.text, and we're going to write that value into that variable. So that's all we need to do on this screen. We're now going to move over to the logged in screen, and we want to grab that value. So you can see the variable is here on this screen as well, because it's a global for all scenes variable. And we're going to use a start trigger again, so that we can apply the name that the user's inputted into our label. So let's choose start. And for this one, we're going to choose start with jump. So there's two options here. Start after jump will execute the responses after the scene, the page has been rendered. But for us, we want it to kind of be there before the user kind of gets to the screen. So we're just going to set it to start with jump, which means that the value will be passed to this label before the screen gets rendered, and therefore it'll just look like it was there already. So that's going to be what we're going to do, and we're going to need to take our variable and put it into the label. So again, we're going to need to assign it, but this time, because we're using a text label, so we've got this text message label here, we're going to need to use the text response. And you see by default, because I had it selected, it's chosen the text message. You'll see any text objects listed here. And again, we're going to use a formula, and we're going to hit the FX button, and this time we want our name variable. So we're going to take the kind of the name that's been added to the name variable from the previous input field, and we're going to write it into that label. So we click OK, and if we go back to our login scene and just run this, so let's just type my name, and remembering our successful password, hit return, and you can see now my name has appeared on the second screen. But if you remember, if we just go back to here, we've actually got this welcome and then the name, so we want to make this welcome message a little bit more personalized. So we just need to do a little bit of extra work here. So we're going to do it here in the text field. So if we just go back into this FX, and what we're going to do is we're just going to wrap some of that text around our name variable. So to add extra text, we need to just put that within quotes. So we're going to add some quotes, and we're going to put welcome and a space, and then we need to effectively add these two things together. So we need to put a plus in between. So it's going to be welcome plus name. Okay. So, and actually just to double check that you've got a space at the end, because there's no space inside the name, so we just want to space those two values out. So if we now go back to our login screen, let's put our name back in, our successful password, and hit return, and there we have it, a personalized message. So there you go. We've now created a login process. We've used conditional logic to ascertain whether the password is correct or not, and if it's not correct, we've put the error handling on the password field, and then if it is correct, we've allowed our user into our logged in state. And we've also used a variable and some other new responses to pass the input the user puts inside the username, and we passed it to this label here. So that concludes part 2 of input fields. Hope that's been enjoyable for you. Hope it gives you some new things to play around with, and I'll see you next time.